This is a screencast to support a lesson on comparative adjectives in the context of travel, taken from Speak Out Elementary by Francis Eales and Steve Oakes, and it's Unit 7.1. So first of all, we need to lead into the topic of the lesson. So you could either choose the question, choose this activity 1A, or there's another nice idea here in the teacher's book, just some discussion questions about travelling or holidays. You could put that on the board and have students discuss together for a few minutes before getting some feedback in the group. We're then going to move straight into the speaking. In an hour lesson, we won't have time for this vocabulary as well. So we're going to move straight into the speaking because that sets the context for our grammar later on in the lesson. So first of all, they can work individually to do this little quiz. You could either send it in the chat box for them to see or just display it on the board and they can make a note of their answers. They only need to write A, B or C. Then they can talk together either in the main room or the breakout rooms to see if they had similar or different answers. They'll then listen to two people doing this same quiz. So make sure the quiz is still visible while they listen, and then they're going to answer these two questions about it. Do a peer check before getting some feedback together. You make sure the feedback is visual as well as verbal at this point. They'll then listen again to the same recording and they need to write M or W next to the quiz here. So again, make sure it's visible and they could just write number 1, M or W, number 2, M or W, because obviously we can't give them a printed out version of that. Just make sure that they can see it and they're really clear on what they need to do, what they need to write while they're listening. Again, peer check and then do some feedback as a group. If you've got time, you could do 2C, but I think it's best to move on to the grammar at this point. So we're going to do the language focus, which of course this lesson is comparative adjectives. As usual, I wouldn't give the audio script and ask them to find these examples because it will take them a really long time. And then what was a listening becomes a reading. So you look through the audio script, find the example sentences here, show the example sentences on the board and ask learners to fill in the spaces. This is a guided discovery approach to looking at the comparative adjectives. So here we can focus first on meaning. So the main points of meaning with comparative adjectives is that I'm talking about two things and those two things are different. We can then go on to form, which has a variety of rules based on spelling and based on syllables in words. So here for comparatives, it's best to look at adjective syllables and the form together. So for example, short adjectives with one syllable always have ER after it, faster than. Long adjectives with 3 or more syllables, we put more in front of them. There are some that go in the middle, like modern, 2 syllables, sometimes can have more, or other adjectives with only 2 syllables, we might put ER on the end as well. For now, stick to the examples that they're going to be using later in their controlled and freer practice. We don't want to bombard them with all the possible rules. It's also good to note the irregular adjectives. So you could give students this table. You can see there are some spaces in it and ask them to complete it. Make sure that the examples here in the table refer to the example sentences you've got here. So provide the example sentences and the table together, and they can use the examples to fill in the table. At this point, we don't want them to be using the language. They're not ready to do that yet. So even though it kind of seems like they're copying, what they're doing is using the language that they've heard in the audio to work out the form, the rules for the form at this point. Then go on to do some pronunciation. So the main things to focus on with comparatives is the weak ER sounding at the end of the adjective and the weak than sound. So Planes are faster than trains. Planes are faster than trains. Work out where the stress of the word is. So usually it will come on the syllable, the stressed syllable of the adjectives. Planes are faster than trains. And the two things that are being compared. Do a lot of drilling here, both at word and sentence level, so students can get a feel for the stress and the features of connected speech. They'll then go on to do the control practice, 5A, which is where they need to make sentences comparing these two things. Make sure you do an example or two together. You could do an example with a short adjective and a long adjective, just to remind them that sometimes they put ER, sometimes they put more. Let them do that independently, writing their answers down in their notebooks, and then they can do a peer check together before you feed back for some content, and you could write the sentences on the board. If there are a lot of mistakes, you could focus on these in feedback. They're then going to go on to do the freer practice, which is here in 6A, so they can choose two places they know and use the comparative adjectives to describe them. I would definitely have some pictures on a slide at this point to help scaffold the task. So you could have a picture of Bristol and maybe a picture of London, or you could have pictures of just different kinds of cities or different kinds of restaurants, different activities like they've got here that you can do in cities. Elicit some examples of sentences they could say. Do a demonstration with a stronger student, and then give students some thinking time to think of what they're going to say about the pictures, and then put them into breakout rooms and let them share their opinions. They might not agree on certain things. You could also, before they go into the breakout rooms, generate some adjectives that they could use, just to give them as much language guidance as possible to help them be successful in the task. So, you could have expensive, cheap, interesting, boring, fast, slow, next to the pictures or in and around the pictures to give students some ideas of what they could say. While they're in the breakout rooms, you can monitor discreetly, making notes of good language or areas for improvement, which you can then use in delayed error correction when you come back to the main room for feedback. That's the end of the lesson, so you can thank students and close the class.